When people talk about forgiveness, they tend to fall in one of two camps. It's either they reject it completely because they think that to forgive someone is weakness and that you're absolving them of accountability, which you're not. Or you see it as something that benefits you because you understand that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So when we talk about forgiveness being impossible when anger is your protection, some people have a notion that, if I don't forgive you, then you'll feel bad. And in a way, they kind of have a point. Because there are people who, they don't want others to have a bad opinion of them. These are mostly codependent people, though. People who live for the approval of others, they find the disapproval of others, quite undigestible. So if you don't forgive them, they'll carry the guilt, they'll carry the shame, and the person who doesn't forgive ensures that the other person suffers. But if you were to try that with a narcissist or a healthy interdependent person, it would never work. So let's look at an example of how, or rather, let's look at an example of not forgiving because you'd rather use anger as protection, and let's see what happened, right? So consider World War One, right? The Allied forces, they're victorious. They meet up at the Paris Peace Conference to discuss the future of Europe, but specifically Germany. Austria had made some demands of Serbia because some Serbs had gone and killed Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austrian throne. But how did the Germans get involved? Well, they were allies to Austria, and World War One started, and Austria kind of sucked in certain ways, but Germany was kind of decent. There was a point where, hey, it looked like they were kind of winning the war, but they kind of played dirty against France and Britain. They had invaded neutral Belgium, they had used chlorine gas, they had torpedoed a British vessel that was carrying civilians. But once the US had joined up with Britain and France, Germany was done. They lost the war. So as a result, the Treaty of Versailles made Germany admit guilt. They had their army shrunken in size, and they had to pay reparations as well. So there definitely had to be sanctions against the losers, right? Because they were pushing all this animosity and pushing all this badness. But the reality is, ideally, the end of a war is supposed to bring about a time of peace. Now, again, the reparations make sense because if you break it, you fix it. And Germany was full of hubris in backing Austria-Hungary, and it didn't pay off. However, to blame the war solely on Germany was humiliating because it just wasn't true, right? So because of this, German nationalism spiked, which then led to the Third Reich, which then led to World War II. So what was the point of that? It didn't make any sense in treating the Germans in this way, right? It's not that they shouldn't have been sanctioned, but by pouring salt into the wound and not truly letting go of the conflict and instead choosing to embarrass Germany, the war never truly ended because peace never truly began. And this is the challenge that every individual has when they believe that forgiveness is akin to weakness. What you're actually showing the world is that you don't believe that the person who hurt you is safe. So you're going to use anger and resentment to keep them away. Okay, but wouldn't it just be enough to just not trust them? You don't need animosity to not trust somebody. You saw what they did. You saw that they're untrustworthy, so just don't trust them. You know what I'm saying? If I sit on a chair and it gives way under my weight, the next time I see it, I just won't sit on the chair. I don't need to be like, oh, I'm going to kick the chair and hate the chair. That's pointless, right? If someone that I used to trust or once trusted, if they betrayed me, it's natural to feel hurt. Obviously. How could I not be hurt by you taking advantage of my trust. Trust isn't cheap. So, for you to use my trust, you earned my trust, and then you spent it for your own gain. Fuck you. And that's how France felt. France knew that Germany, yeah, they're coming up, they're getting money, da 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 da, great, that's great. But they had also taken some land from Germany. Rather, sorry, Germany had taken some land from France, right? France was kind of scared of Germany. And that's exactly why they wanted to humiliate them. Because by humiliating them, it would kind of push them down and it would kind of cause them to not rise back up. But that's not what happened. It just led to the Third Reich that just made Europe, and of course France, even more terrified and terrorized. So let's look at another example, but this time one that actually involved forgiveness, right? So consider apartheid. We have Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu. They created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that they could uncover the truth about the human rights violations that happened under apartheid. And when the white men and women kind of went to, it's kind of like a court kind of situation. And so they would confess to the abuse that they committed against the Africans and the Xhosa people. They could have been maybe given some degree of amnesty depending on how bad the offense was. Now, critics didn't really love that. They thought that the commission was a waste of time. Because let's face it, couldn't the abusers just lie? Couldn't they just minimize what happened? Of course they could. And by doing that, they wouldn't have to suffer as harsh a penalty. Which of course would then mean that the black South Africans would never truly see justice. So I think that is a fair critique because of course people lie. But here's the funny thing. Despite that, similar truth and reconciliation commissions were done in Canada, South Korea, Guatemala, Philippines, Morocco, Rwanda, Ecuador. Did I say Ghana? Ghana as well, if I didn't say Ghana before. Why is that? Well, because conflict is natural. Conflict is ubiquitous. Conflict is everywhere. And the fact of the matter is, conflict tends to give rise to feelings of hate and resentment. But how does a society move on? How do a people move on if they don't put that hate and resentment behind them? If anyone could have been tempted to hold on to resentment, it would have been the guy who was imprisoned for 27 years because he dared to fight for the respect for black people. So one of the greatest things Mandela ever said was, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. So in addition to that, when Mandela still kept white South Africans in the government and in his personal security detail, it showed the black people, the white people, the South Africans, the time of apartheid is over. The time of, one race being in power and hurting the other race, that's over. Right? Now, I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you do something wrong, I do believe that there should be sanctions. But shaming others for the hurt that they did only maintains a warring spirit, which ensures more conflict to come. It's easy to take the hurt that we feel and push it back on someone else because it helps us to communicate how they're making us feel. But what if they push back? Well, now you have a choice. Are you committed to war or are you committed to peace? Now, personally, I agree with Solomon. I think there's a time for both. But you have to be mindful because once you start a war, it's hard to stop because you're fueled with hatred. It's hard to stop because You start to believe that peace won't protect you. You forget that hatred may offer temporary safety, but ultimately, it's destructive. And look, it's very hard to convince people to forgive. I mean, if it was so easy, would I really need to be making this video? People would rather hold on to anger. They would rather drink the poison because at least they can spit it out on those who hurt them. But with a mouthful of poison, how do you eat good food? How do you drink water? How do you kiss your children? So when we're thinking about an impending World War III, we're thinking about ICE in America, we're thinking about Sudan, there's so many different things. And it's natural to be enraged. When we're thinking about our own gripes with people in life, it's natural to be enraged. It shows that you stand for something, namely, defending the human rights of innocent people or defending your own personal rights, right? Because after all, you do care about yourself. So the solution is, if you want to get over your anger because you don't want to become like the people you despise, the trick is to consciously allow yourself to be angry. You don't have to take action while angry, and I would definitely recommend that you not do that, right? But when you actually just let yourself be angry, you actually calm yourself down, and you still remember to hold the guilty parties accountable. That way, you can forgive, you won't forget, but you aren't holding it over people's heads like the Allies did to Germany. And if you really think about it, right? So many conflicts start with anger, but how many conflicts could have actually been squashed if people actually were able to just kind of honor what they were feeling, process what they were feeling, and then be like, oh yeah, well, I'm not so angry anymore, but I still recognize that what that person did was wrong, but I can go about it in a way that won't lead to a world war, right? So what we can do is leave that prison of resentment like Mandela wisely did, because you understand that anger won't protect you anyway. It just leads to more of the things you want protection from. It just leads to more conflict. But if you want more conflict, I mean, obviously you know what to do. Just be mindful that you can't hurt people unless you have pain within yourself first. You can have the poison to spit at others, but you will hurt yourself and those you love. I'm sorry. It can't be prevented.